Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I don't know about you, but in the community that I live in here, there's actually a thunderstorm outside. So, I guess there is a small possibility that, I might lose connection from the thunderstorm. So just a gentle caution that, if I suddenly go black here, probably my power's been knocked out. So, okay. Welcome back. And thanks for coming out even when you're exhausted. Thank you, Rebecca. So, okay. This is an exciting week from the perspective that some important things are going to start to happen, right? So this morning you do have your first laboratory exam. That will start at 9:30. So, after lecture's over at 9:30, you want to log into classmarker.com and take your laboratory exam. That is the only thing you have to complete today for your lab responsibility. Once your lab exam is done, the rest of the morning is yours. You don't have to come back in with me for Zoom or anything like that, okay? So once again, please log into Classmarker at 9:30 and take your lab exam. Good luck to you. I know you've been working hard over the past several weeks. Also, today marks the 2-week period before your first lecture exam, right? Your lecture exam is now 2 weeks away. Your lecture exam is scheduled for October 12th, okay? And so what I wanted to let you know is that you can expect that sometime later today, I will place the study guide for the very first lecture exam in the Files tab of the lecture portion of Wiley Plus. Okay, the study guide for the first lecture exam will be placed in Wiley Plus later today, and I encourage you to take a look at that. Okay. Do you have any questions right now before we continue with content? Okay, please let me know. What we're going to do today is start chapter 4, which is the tissue chapter. So if we think back to the material we've already covered, okay, there's a question in the chat window here. Let me address the question in the chat window. Okay. So Rebecca's asking, how much time do we have to finish the exam today? Okay, the exam today will be open during your lab time. That means that the exam is open between 9:30 and 12:10, but you must finish it by the end of that period, okay? So you can log in. My preference is that you log in at 9:30, but you could log in at 11 o'clock if you want to. The point is that you must finish the exam by 12:10 today. Okay, other questions? In terms of how long is the exam, well, there are 39 questions, so you have 39 minutes. Okay, you have 39 minutes to answer 39 questions. Okay. Anything else? Okay. If you think back to how the course has been going, right? Chapter 1 was introducing you to the basic systems of the human body, also introducing you to the anatomical position and some relational terms. You had some lab homework based on that. So chapter 1 got you started in the course. Chapter 2 is a conversation about chemistry, including all the varieties of organic macromolecules that exist, talking about things like that. Chapter 3 is about cells, what they're made of, moving cargo through the cells, some of the major processes of the cells like gene expression and protein synthesis, right? That's gotten us to this moment here. Now we're going to start a conversation about tissues, okay? All right, so let's begin that. Chapter 4, which we're starting today, is the final chapter that you will be responsible for on lecture exam 1 in 2 weeks, right? After we cover chapter 4, we've now covered all the content that you will be tested on in 2 weeks on lecture exam 1. All right, so tissues, if you're in your textbook here, around pages 111, 112, 113, this is what we're talking about. Let's put a definition down, okay? The term tissue refers to a group of cells that work together to carry out specialized activities, okay? The term tissue refers to a group of cells that work together to carry out specialized activities, okay? A quick example would be muscle tissue, right? Muscle tissue is made of large groups of individual muscle cells that are working together to create a contractile force that allows you to move your skeleton, right? Swing your arms, walk across the floor, pick up a cup of coffee that's in front of you. That group of cells works together as a team to contract and pick something up or move the body. Okay, so this term refers to a specific group of cells that work together as a team to carry out specialized activities. It is also true that the cells that are part of this team, the cells that are part of the tissue, they're often part of the tissue because they share a common origin from an embryonic standpoint. Okay, they're embryonically related to each other. Cells that are part of a tissue often have a common embryonic origin, okay? A common embryonic origin. Okay, well, let's list out the major types of tissues, and we'll just give you a few comments about each category before we go into more detail. Okay, so there's 4 major tissues, right? Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. That should roll off your tongue by the time you're done with this chapter. Just like in chapter 2, we told you the 4 categories of organic macromolecules, right? They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. That should be rolling off the tongue at this point. By the end of chapter 4, you should know epithelial, connective, and muscle and nervous tissue. Those are the 4 types. Okay, epithelial. All right, so epithelial tissue, what can we say about this? Okay, epithelial tissue covers body surfaces. Okay, and it's important to realize when we say epithelial tissue covers body surfaces, most people think immediately of your skin, right? Think about your arm and the skin on the surface of your arm. That's epithelial tissue, made of epithelial tissue. But a body surface does not have to be external. It can be internal, right? Think about all the interior surfaces of your body. Think about the hollow space in your throat. Think about the hollow space in your esophagus. Think about the hollow space in your stomach. Think about the hollow space in your intestines. Okay, if you think about your garden hose, water goes through your garden hose, and there's an inner lining of the garden hose. That inner lining has an inner surface. That's kind of like what your intestines look like. That inner surface is made of epithelial cells, epithelial tissue. Okay, so this would include the exterior surfaces. This would include exterior surfaces like the skin, and interior surfaces like the lining of blood vessels and your GI tract anatomy. Okay. So that's one primary function of the epithelial tissue, is to cover a body's surface, whether it's inside or outside the body. A second major feature of epithelial cells is to form what we call the secretory parts of your glands. The secretory parts of glands. Okay, so probably an example there would be your sweat glands. Okay, your sweat glands are actually organs, and as organs, they are made of different tissues. The part of your sweat gland that actually secretes sweat is made of specialized epithelial tissue. Okay, you also have epithelial tissue inside organs like your heart. Okay, your heart is a giant muscle, right? It's a pump. But you might know that the heart has the capability of releasing certain hormones into the bloodstream. Well, the anatomy of the heart that releases hormones into the bloodstream is actually made of epithelial tissue. Okay, so epithelial tissue does two major things. It covers the body surfaces and it forms the secretory parts of the glands. Okay, please stop me along the way if you have any questions. Okay, next tissue is the connective tissue. Okay, connective tissue is kind of interesting because connective tissue does exactly what the word itself suggests, right? Think about it. In the word connective, we have the word connect, do we not? Okay, connective. One of the primary functions of connective tissue is to bind parts of the body together, to glue them together, to connect them together, to stick them together. That's the job of connective tissue. Okay, so connective tissue works to bind, glue, attach different body structures together. Okay. And so there's many different kinds of connective tissue, and we'll be walking through many of them together as we cover this chapter. Okay, but think about connective tissue as Elmer's glue for the body. Okay. Okay. Connective tissue also plays an important role in our body defense as part of our immune system. Okay. Connective tissue also plays a role in our immune system through cells that are part of the bloodstream. Okay. Believe it or not, blood is considered a tissue, even though it's a liquidy tissue. It's made of plasma, the water-based part of the blood, and the extracellular component, which is the cells themselves. Okay, white blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, leukocytes, lymphocytes, these sorts of things. Okay, these are connective tissue cells, and they protect us from harm. Okay, all right. The third type of tissue is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is made of cells that contract and they generate force, and then that force can be used to do something, typically move a body structure, such as, moving your arms or legs, or allowing you to lift your head up, that kind of thing. Or as we say, we could pick up an object in the immediate environment, pick up a pen, pencil, cup of coffee, your tablet, your computer, whatever it might be. Okay, so this is made of cells that contract and generate force to move body structures. Okay. Muscle tissue also, because of the contraction, right? Muscle tissue also for the muscles to contract, you have to burn a lot of biochemical fuel. As you've come to learn, or you will come to learn, that biochemical fuel is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And as you burn that chemical fuel, the energy released from burning the chemical fuel is used to move the body structure, right? Move my arm. But at the same time, there's also a measure of heat energy that's released. So what I'm saying is that the contraction of muscle tissue is powered by burning fuel, which some of that fuel is converted into a waste heat. Now, it's not really waste, because that waste heat actually helps us maintain our inside homeostatically healthy body temperature. Okay. Contraction is powered by the breakdown of ATP, which releases heat that is used to maintain a homeostatically healthy body temperature. All right, so epithelial, connective, and muscle, these are three tissue categories. And then we have nervous system tissue. That's the fourth and final one. Okay, nervous system tissue is that tissue of our body that allows us to understand the environment that we're in, right? Just look around the room and you can see what your room looks like through sensory information coming into your eyes. Right now, you can hear my voice coming through your computer speaker because there's nerve impulses, electrical signals that are being created in the nervous system that allows your brain to say, oh, my teacher is telling me something right now. Okay, so the nervous system is that tissue which is very much engaged in allowing you to interpret your world. Nervous tissue is made of cells that enables us to interpret our world, our environment. The nervous tissue achieves this through very specialized electrical signals called nerve impulses. Okay, we're the bottom 1/3 of our semester, we're going to be talking a lot about nerve impulses. We're going to be talking a lot about nervous system anatomy and nervous system functionality. Okay, I will say this: if you were to ask the question, which system of the body, right? There are 11 major organ systems, right? 11 major organ systems. You know this from information in chapter 1. Which system of the body is the master command and control system? Which system of the body has the ability to influence just about everything else taking place in the body? Well, nervous system's at the top, right? Nervous system is king of command and control. The tissue of the nervous system forms the nervous system command and control structure. Okay. All right, folks. So that's just a very, very, very little introduction to the 4 major tissue categories. And our job through the next 2 lectures is to describe more of this content to you. Is there any question you'd like to ask right now? Okay, so we're just getting started here. Now we know the 4 major tissue types. And think about it, a tissue is a group of cells. Well, there becomes this question. What holds the cells together, right? In chapter 2, when we were talking about molecules, right? Molecules are groups of atoms. Well, why do these groups of atoms stay together? Well, they stay together because of these things known as chemical bonds. There's something called chemical bonds which links atoms together to form molecules. in an analogous way, there are bonds between cells that form groups of cells that form tissues, okay? So these bonds are not bonds in a chemical sense like we talked about in chapter 2, okay? These are cell junctions. So let's take a look at figure 4.2 on page 113. Okay, so the next topic is holding cells together, cell junctions, okay? If we're going to have a tissue, that means we need to have groups of cells. If we're going to have groups of cells, we need to have a way of organizing these groups of cells. We need to have a way of providing some structural coherence to the group so that they stay associated with each other to carry out their specialized activities. So the first thing is to appreciate what that phrase cell junction really means. The phrase cell junction refers to contact points between the plasma membranes of adjacent cells, okay? Where two cells have contact between each of their plasma membranes. When they're, it's like having a balloon, a red colored balloon in my left hand and a blue colored balloon in my right hand. And if I were to bring the balloons together so that the rubber, the latex of the balloons were to touch each other, that would be a balloon junction. That would be a cell junction. It's the same thing here, okay? Points of contact between the plasma membranes, these are the cell junctions. There's a variety of types that we're just going to quickly catalog into your notes here. First are tight junctions. Okay, and I will refer you during your private study time here to figure 4.2. Okay, so you should be looking at this. Tight junctions, as you look at the picture of them, take a look, that's picture A there, right? They have a spider web-like appearance to it. They have a spider web-like appearance. They are made of specialized, the tight junction itself, this thing that we're calling a tight junction. What is it they're made of? They are made of transmembrane proteins that kind of stitch the two plasma membranes together. Okay. All right. It really is not terribly important if you can tell me the names of the proteins in these structures. I also am not going to ask it on a test, but I'll tell you what some of these proteins are called. So if you look at the tight junction structure, look at that spider web, you say, well, what is that spider web made of? It's made of special proteins. Well, what would some of these proteins be named? Here's two of them for you. There's a protein called occludin and another protein called claudin that make up the structure of the spider web that you see in figure 4.2. Occludin and claudin proteins make up this structure. Okay, well, where am I going to find tight junctions? What kind of anatomy in the body am I going to find tight junctions? Well, all kinds of places is the honest answer, but you're going to find tight junctions in epithelial cells that line our stomach, our intestines, and our urinary bladder. Commonly found in epithelial tissue in stomach, intestines, and urinary bladder. Okay, and the reason that you find tight junctions in these locations, okay, think about this anatomy here, right? The stomach is going to have liquid in it, not only because you drink liquid, but because there's stomach acid in the stomach. Well, the intestines are connected to the stomach and they must control the passage of liquid. The urinary bladder, right? It's going to have urine in it. It's going to have pee in it. So what I'm saying is you're going to find tight junctions in the area of the body where you need to strictly regulate the passage of liquids in and through the body. You want to control it, okay? You don't want liquid going in places it's not supposed to be, right? Think about how awful it would be if your urinary bladder was made of material that was actually leaky so that the urine spilled out inside your body, right? That wouldn't be a very healthy situation. It would promote a lot of infection, okay? So these tight junctions are found in anatomy that must control how liquids move. Okay. All right. So if I were to use an analogy, tight junctions are kind of like a row home. Think about a row home where you have this large rectangular structure and there's 4 homes in it, right? 4 families living in it. But each family is separated by a wall. And that wall is impermeable. It does not allow you to go through the wall into your neighbor's living room. That really would not be desirable, right? We don't want to have those kinds of structures, generally speaking. So tight junction forms an impermeable seal between cells. All right. Okay, so that's the first type of cell junction. Next type of cell junction are known as adhering junctions or adherens junctions. Okay. An adhering junction. Okay. These are made of transmembrane glycoproteins. Remember, we mentioned glycoprotein as a possibility for plasma membranes in chapter 3, right? Glycoproteins are proteins which have a carbohydrate attached to them, and they stick through the plasma membrane of cells. So these are made of transmembrane glycoproteins called cadherins, okay, called cadherins. If you take a close look at figure 4.2, notice you'll see transmembrane protein cadherin under panel B of the topic that we're currently talking about, okay? All right, the adherens junctions are going to be found in areas where you have smooth muscle tissue. Commonly found in areas with smooth muscle tissue. So that that would be, as an example, that would include the lining of our gastrointestinal tract, you know, esophagus, stomach, intestines. Okay. Adherens junctions. They provide good structural integrity to that anatomy, so that when you have smooth muscle going around the circumference, the outer portion of your intestinal system, when it contracts, right, it doesn't rip the tissue apart because there's good structural integrity. The adhering junctions protein provide that structural integrity. Okay. All right, so that's adhering junctions, okay? If you look very carefully at the picture on page 113, figure 4.2, the adhering junctions picture, you'll notice that the cadherin protein is actually connected to a substance known as plaque. And that plaque has these little tubes in it called microfilaments, which are made of actin proteins. The microfilaments, of course, are part of the cell's cytoskeleton. You may recall that from our conversation in chapter 3. Okay. I will comment here that adhering junctions also create impermeable seals. In other words, you cannot exchange material between cells that are joined by adhering junctions. Okay. Next, we have a related structure called a desmosome. Desmosomes would be panel C of figure 4.2. Okay. Desmosomes are actually very similar to the adherence junctions, except that the cadherin proteins, they connect to a different type of substance in the plaque. It's not really that important that you know it off the top of your head, but if you look carefully, you'll notice that the desmosome has something known as keratin present. Okay, you see that there, the intermediate filaments, keratin. Okay, so the cadherin connects to keratin proteins instead of to the actin proteins of the adherence junctions. Okay, very similar to adhering junctions, but the connecting material is made of keratin instead of actin. Desmosomes are going to be found in your heart. Okay, desmosomes are found abundantly in heart tissue. Okay, and again, their job is to provide a lot of structural integrity. Think about how many times your heart contracts even in a single day of your life, right? Your heart really doesn't get to rest too much. It's constantly contracting, right? Contract, rest, contract, rest, contract, rest, contract, rest. It doesn't really get a long period of rest. So your heart muscle becomes very robust and it needs to have very good structural integrity so the heart doesn't literally rip itself apart because of its constant contraction. Okay. Provides excellent structural integrity to maintain the anatomy of the heart. Okay. Next, we have hemidesmosomes. Hemidesmosomes is panel D in figure 4.2. Okay. Hemidesmosomes are kind of unique. Okay. All right. So let me pause here and reiterate something, right? The purpose of the cell junctions that we're listing out is to connect groups of cells together to form tissues, right? That's what we're saying. That's what we've been saying. That's what we're putting in your notes. Hemidesmosomes are a little bit strange because they do not connect adjacent cells to each other. Okay, so here's the exception to our rule. Hemidesmosomes do not connect adjacent cells. What they do is connect cells to something known as a basement membrane. So we'll say this first. Unlike other cell junctions which connect cells, hemidesmosomes are used to connect cells to a structure called the basement membrane. Okay, so let me highlight that, right? This is something you need to pay attention to. Unlike other cell junctions which connect cells, hemidesmosomes are used to connect cells to a structure called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is something that we're going to talk about in about 5 minutes, so hang on, okay? I'm just pointing out the hemidesmosome is kind of a weird bird. It doesn't quite fit our normal description of things, okay? You're going to find a lot of hemidesmosomes in the anatomy of your skin. Okay, of course, your skin is part of the integumentary system. The integumentary system is an organ system. Your skin is an organ. It's the largest organ of your body in terms of surface area and mass, right? Your skin is it. It's the largest organ. You're going to have a tremendous number of hemidesmosomes present there. We'll talk about the significance of the basement membrane in just a few minutes. Okay, the fifth and final cell junction is the gap junction. Okay, the gap junctions, take a look at them. These little tubes, if you see them there, if you look at them, it looks like these little structures form little channels or tubes that connect cells together, formed by proteins called connexins, which form tubes that connect the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of another cell. And that's something I really need to emphasize. Of the 5 cell junction types we have placed into your notes at this moment, the gap junction is the only junction which actually allows for the direct exchange of cytoplasmic material between cells. Okay, earlier I used this idea, this analogy of a row home, all right? When we were up here talking about tight junctions. Tight junctions would be like having a row home where you have 5 families living in one structure, but the families are separated by walls, right? And generally speaking, you cannot go through that wall into your neighbor's living room. That would be a tight junction scenario. But what if the wall between 2 families actually had a door, and that door could be open, and you could walk from the living room of your family's home into the living room of your neighbor's home? That would be an exchange of material between living rooms, an exchange of material between families. That's what gap junctions permit. Okay. So gap junctions are the only type of junction that allow for the direct cytoplasmic exchange of material between cells. Okay. So, all right. So I'm just going to highlight that word only there so to be sure that you're paying attention to that. Okay. You're going to find a lot of gap junctions in nervous system tissue and in muscle tissue, particularly the heart as well. Okay, so this is found abundantly in nervous tissue and cardiac muscle. And the reason for that is because these tissues, nervous tissue and cardiac muscle, work on a principle of electrical excitation, where there's an electrical signal that must propagate from one cell to another cell to another cell to another cell. And the propagation of the electrical signal is facilitated, is enabled by the gap junction, so that the electrical signal can go from one cell and then pass through the open door between the wall of the cells, using the living room analogy again, into a neighboring cell to continue to electrically excite the next cell. So gap junctions are used any places you're going to find a lot of electrical activity. Gap junctions are going to be found abundantly in nervous tissue and cardiac muscle that rely on electrical signals to control body processes. Okay, folks, don't worry too much about understanding the deep molecular structure of these junctions. I honestly don't care, if you can tell me about cadherin and those types of things you see in figure 4.2, but you should at least be aware of the various types of cell junctions that are used to group cells together, okay? Do you have any questions right now? Okay, all right, so we're going to begin our conversation here by making a table that compares and contrasts epithelial tissue and connective tissue. And the reason we'll do that is because epithelial and connective tissue are often very intimately related to each other, particularly in the context of your skin, right? Because you have a lot of connective tissue in the dermal layer of your skin, and the dermal layer of your skin is covered by epidermis, and epidermis is specialized epithelial tissue. So epithelial and connective tissue have a special organizational relationship to each other. So we're going to start by talking about them together. Okay, think about epithelial and connective tissue as a quarter, right? A quarter has one side which we call heads and the other side which we call tails. It's that kind of relationship between epithelial and connective tissue. They're like two sides of the same coin, okay? So let's make a chart here comparing epithelial and connective tissues. I want to insert this table here. Not quite sure how big I need it to be, but we'll put in the middle column, we'll put epithelial tissue. In the rightmost column, we'll put connective tissue. Okay. In the first column, what we will simply do is make some sort of statement. Okay. So the first thing to appreciate is, there is going to be a moment in your future. There's going to be a moment in your future where on an exam, I'm going to show you some pictures, some images of tissues, and you're going to have to tell me what kind of tissue it is. Don't worry about that right now. Don't worry about that right now. Right now, you worry about lab exam 1. But in the future, I will be challenging you to identify tissues with photographs. And so one of the things becomes, well, how do I tell an epithelial tissue from a connective tissue? And that is what figure 4.3 is all about on page 114. Take a look at figure 4.3. Okay, so one of the ways you tell an epithelial tissue from connective tissue is look at the number of cells that you can see, look at the number of cells compared to the volume of space in between the cells, okay? Okay, look at the number of cells compared to the volume of space in between the cells, okay? Take a look at that figure 4.3. I'll highlight this in your notes. Okay, if you look at figure 4.3, picture A, notice when you look at epithelial cells, pretty much all you see is cells, right? You see many, many cells that are connected together, and there's really not a lot of open space in between those cells, right? They're just like many cells that are stacked on top of each other like pancakes. So for epithelial tissue, you're going to find many cells and little extracellular space. Many cells and little extracellular space. For connective tissue, you're going to find the exact opposite. If you look at picture B on figure 4.3, Notice you definitely see a couple cells there, right? Look at those intensely purple blobs, those intense purple circular ones, right? I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 cells there. Some of them are cut off by the photograph, but you're going to see few cells and a large volume of space in between those cells. Okay, so epithelial tissue has many cells and little extracellular space. Connective tissue has few cells, a small number of cells, and a large volume of space in between those cells. Okay. All right. Question in the chat window. Is the idea of looking at cell number, the number of cells relative to the space between the cells, okay with you? Is this making sense when you look at figure 4.3? Okay, all right. Identifying muscle tissue is pretty easy. Identifying nervous tissue, pretty easy. Identifying and telling the difference between epithelial tissue and connective tissue can be hard unless you appreciate the very first bullet point we've put into this chart, which is look at the number of cells compared to the amount of space between the cells. Epithelial is just basically cells, and very little to no extracellular space. Connective tissue is just a couple cells, a handful of cells with a lot of extracellular space. Okay, number 2. Let's talk about the presence of blood vessels. Okay, epithelial tissue does not have blood vessels. There are no blood vessels. Okay. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't seem right, Dr. Allen, because the last time I saw somebody cut their scalp, get a head injury or a head wound, which obviously there's a lot of skin there, which is epithelial tissue, there was a lot of blood. And the reality of it is that if you have blood coming out of your scalp or any other area of your skin, it's because that laceration, the cut, has gone deeply enough that you've penetrated not only the epithelial tissue, but the underlying connective tissue. That's the dermal layer of skin. Okay, so epithelial tissue has no blood vessels, but connective tissue has many blood vessels. Okay, so if you get a head wound and it's bleeding, you have damaged the underlying connective tissue underneath the epithelial cells. All right. Here's another statement. Is the tissue that we're talking about covered by additional tissue? For epithelial cells, for epithelial tissue, the answer is generally no, with some exceptions. Think about it. Okay, think about the surface of your arm. Is there additional material on the surface of your arm? Well, no, there isn't, right? There's nothing on the surface of your arm. There's nothing on the surface of the skin that makes up the arm. So the outer surface of your skin is made of epithelial. Is there anything on top of that? No, there's not. So is that material covered with additional material? No. Okay. Now there are some exceptions. Okay. Let me ask you this. What type of tissue did we say forms the lining of blood vessels? in the chat window, what type of tissue did we say forms the lining of blood vessels? Okay, think about the inside surface of your garden hose, right? That surface has got to be made of something. Thanks, everybody. It's coming across now, right? Just take a look. It's made of epithelial. Epithelial tissue forms the lining of blood vessels. So you ask yourself, is there anything covering the lining? Well, yes, it's called blood, and blood is a connective tissue. You see, so that would be an example where you have an exception to this general rule. Okay, so is epithelial tissue covered with additional tissue? No, with some exceptions. One exception would be where blood covers the inside lining of blood vessels. Okay. Now for connective tissue, the question is connective tissue covered by additional tissue? And the answer is a very strong and prominent yes. Yes, connective tissue in various locations of your body can be covered by the three other types of tissues. It can be covered by epithelial, it can be covered by muscle, and it can be covered by nervous system tissue, depending on the piece of anatomy that we're talking about. Okay. Number 4, the question, does the tissue we're talking about form a surface? And of course, if we're talking about epithelial tissue, the answer is basically yes. Okay, definitely yes. And for connective tissue, the answer is generally speaking no. Number 5, and I think probably the last thing we'll put down in this table is this question. Are there nerve endings in the tissue? Are nerve endings present in the tissue? Okay, and unlike the answers for blood vessels, right? Blood vessels are not present in epithelial tissue. Nerve endings are present in epithelial tissue. So the answer is yes for epithelium and yes for connective tissue. Okay, folks, you know the answer must be yes for nerve endings being present in epithelial tissue because of the following observation. Take a look down at your arm. You see some little tiny hairs coming off the surface of your arm, right? Those hair follicles. If you were to take one of your fingers and very gently touch any hair on your arm, would you feel it? Would you get a sensation from that? Well, obviously you do. And so that tells you there's nerve endings embedded around the hair root of that hair sticking through your skin. Okay, so there are nerve endings present in the skin. Okay, folks, do you have any questions so far? Okay, so we're going to continue our conversation here. We've done a comparison chart of epithelial and connective tissue. All right. Now I'm going to start talking to you about epithelial tissue in more detail. Okay, this takes us to page 115, and I'm going to start talking to you about the various types of epithelial surfaces of figure 4.4. Right. Okay. Epithelial tissue. All right, first bullet point is epithelial surfaces. Okay, take a look at figure 4.4, page 115 in my book. Okay, and you'll notice that we can actually define 3 alternative surfaces here. First, we have what is known as the free surface, the surface that's really not covered by anything. That's also known as the apical surface. Okay, the apical or free surface, okay, This is used to describe, that term apical is used to describe the topmost superficial layer of the epithelial cells that are not covered by any additional material. Used to describe the topmost superficial layer of cells that does not contact another cell. Okay, that does not contact another cell. All right. In addition to that, we have the lateral surfaces. You see the lateral surfaces are running in between the cells. Okay, this describes the surfaces in between connecting cells. Okay, so in the lateral surfaces, right, you're going to have plasma membranes of cells connecting to each other. So you might very well have a variety of different cell junctions present here, right? You might have tight junctions, adherence junctions, sometimes gap junctions, depending on what the tissue is involved with. Okay. So the lateral surfaces can be glued together with different types of cell junctions. And then if we have a superficial layer, well, then we have to have the opposite of that. We have to have the deepest layer, that's the basal layer. Okay, take a look at the basal surface. And the basal surface refers to the deepest layer of cells. And that deepest layer of cells, in terms of the context of epithelial tissue, is almost always attached to that thing that we call the basement membrane. Okay, so that term basement membrane came up previously in the context of describing the hemidesmosomes of figure 4.2. And so we need to talk about this. We need to talk about the basement membrane. Okay, so number 2 here is basement membrane. Okay, the basement membrane is an anchoring surface for epithelial tissue and connective tissue to glue together. Think of it as the mortar between two different kinds of bricks. If we think about a brick wall and we had, I don't know, just be fanciful here. Let's say we had blue colored bricks and red colored bricks and we have mortar between them. The mortar would be the basement membrane. Okay, so the basement membrane is a type of quote unquote mortar that anchors epithelial tissue to connective tissue. Okay, you can think of the basement membrane as a transition zone between the epithelial and connective tissue. Okay, so let's define what this transition zone that we're calling the basement membrane, let's define what it's actually made of. If we were to go in and do sort of a chemical analysis of the membrane, basement membrane, what would we see? Okay, all right. Okay, let me ask a question in the chat window first. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. When you hear the word membrane, which category of organic macromolecules should enter your mind? When you hear the word membrane, plasma membrane, what category of organic macromolecules should enter your mind? Okay, thanks for the answer, Lauren. How about the rest of you? Okay. Thanks, Sierra. How about the rest of you folks? When you hear the word membrane, what comes to mind? If you answer that nothing comes to mind, that's the concern, right? Okay, well, I'm fishing for something right now, right? What is a plasma membrane made of? Well, it's made of a lot of things, but the majority of it is made of the phospholipid bilayer. So lipids should be entering your mind when you hear the word membrane. Paradoxically, and perhaps confusingly, in the context of our current conversation, the basement membrane is not made of lipids. It's not made of lipids. It's actually made of a slurry of different proteins, okay? So let me just put a comment in your notes here. While the term membrane most usually implies the presence of lipids, like the phospholipids of the plasma membrane, in this context of the basement membrane, there are no lipids. Okay, there are no lipids. The basement membrane is made of two things that we're going to call the basal lamina and the reticular lamina. Composition of the basement membrane. Okay, basal lamina. All right, the basal lamina is an extracellular layer of protein. Okay. These proteins, which are outside cells, are actually manufactured and secreted by the epithelial tissue. Okay, the epithelial tissue, an extracellular layer of proteins which originate in the epithelial tissue. Okay. Next, or underneath them, is the reticular lamina. This is an extracellular layer of protein, specifically collagen protein, which originates in the connective tissue. So folks, let me give you a silly analogy, Imagine this. Imagine we have two pieces of bread laying on top of each other, okay? Two pieces of bread, like my hands, right? Top hand, bottom hand, two pieces of bread laying on top of each other. And let's say the top piece of bread is the epithelial tissue, and the bottom piece of bread is the connective tissue. And then let's say that the top piece of bread, which is the epithelial tissue, is able to manufacture and squeeze out some grape jelly. And then let's say that the bottom piece of bread, which is the connective tissue, has the ability to manufacture and squeeze out some peanut butter. So all of a sudden we have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. if the two pieces of bread you took out of your loaf of bread you bought at the supermarket had the ability to make peanut butter and jelly, that's what the basement membrane is like. The basement membrane is made of a lower piece of bread of connective tissue, which manufactures peanut butter. And the top layer of bread is the epithelial tissue, which manufactures grape jelly. Okay, so the basal lamina is the grape jelly made from the top piece of bread of a sandwich. And the reticular lamina is the peanut butter made from the bottom piece of bread of a sandwich. Okay. Okay. All right, so these proteins, which form these layers that we're giving the names basal lamina and reticular lamina, they are made from the cells above them or below them. The cells above them would be epithelial cells. The cells below it would be connective tissue cells. Okay. All right. Now we're getting close on time. Let me ask you, are you okay right now? Okay, is this making some sense? You can look at the pictures, the figures, you can see what I'm talking about. You say, yes, I understand what we're talking about. Okay, any questions? Okay, all right, folks. So in terms of the basement membrane, okay, so now we know what the basement membrane is. It's this transition zone between epithelial and connective tissue. It's the peanut butter and jelly between the two slices of bread. Okay, well, what does the basement membrane, what does it do? Okay, so functions of the basement membrane. Well, the primary function is to be the anchoring surface, the mortar between the epithelial and connective tissue. We've already said that, but I'll put it down again. To anchor epithelial tissue to connective tissue. But in addition to that, okay, the basement membrane, because of the layering of protein and how it exists in the anatomy of the basement membrane itself, it can actually act as a filter. Okay, so the function of the basement membrane is to act as a filter to regulate the passage of materials between the epithelium and connective tissue layers. Okay, an example of this, okay, an example of this would be in your kidneys, okay, where the basement membrane of a structure called the glomerulus. Okay, the glomerulus is a network of capillaries in the kidneys. At any rate, without going into detail now about that, and you'll get it in A&P too, one of the primary functions of your kidneys is to form urine. And the purpose of forming urine is to regulate the volume and composition of your bloodstream. To form urine, you must filter the blood plasma. The blood plasma is filtered through the basement membrane of that object that I called the glomerulus. Okay, so in the kidneys, the anatomy of the kidney filters blood plasma to form urine. Okay, so part of the filtration capacity of the anatomy of the kidney is due to the basement membranes of the kidney. Okay. All right, let's keep rolling here. Okay. Well, a couple other things that I'll draw your attention to. These things are not difficult, but you should still pay attention to them, because the more you organize the knowledge in your mind, the easier it becomes to learn things, right? The better you organize, the better it is to learn. Okay, let's talk about classification of epithelial tissue. All right, so we could do it two different ways. We could talk about the layering of the cells. Okay, so notice that we have on figure 4.5, we have simple epithelium, where you have a single monolayer of cells. If you see a single layer of epithelial cells, you would describe it as simple epithelium. If you have multiple layers on top of each other, that would be stratified. Okay, so notice that on figure 4.5, simple is on the left and stratified is on the right, and there's something in between. So just hold on a second. Stratified would be multiple layers of cells. And then there is an in-between thing known as pseudostratified. Pseudostratified can be confusing. It can be deceptive when you look at it, because it's pseudo, it's falsely stratified. Pseudostratified epithelium contains a single layer of cells that look as though there's multiple layers. So you have to be very careful with this one. Okay, the deception, what is deceiving about pseudostratified tissue is that if you look at the picture pseudostratified, you notice the cells are basically the same height, but look at the position of the nuclei. Look at the position of the nucleus in neighboring cells. The position of the nucleus is different, and that position of the nucleus, if you're not careful, can deceive you into thinking that it's stratified when it's simply pseudostratified. So the deception is caused by the varying positions of the of nuclei between neighboring cells. Okay, and that's something you'll have to spend some time looking at. Okay. I'm just trying to see if I can get you a good picture of it. There's not a tremendously good picture. If you take a look at table 4.1 panel E, table 4.1 panel E on page 119, you will see non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. It's not the best picture if we're being honest, but it's something to look at. Okay. All right, so the layering of the cells is one way that you can classify epithelial tissue. The other manner of classifying cells is by cell shape. Okay, I know we're almost out of time here, and I'm going to honor that time because I know you have your exam coming out. So in just 30 seconds or so, we'll stop. So cell shape is the second characteristic here. First, we have squamous. If you look at figure 4.5, you know the squamous cells are very thin, flat, pancake-like cells. Okay, so hopefully you can see that when you look at the image. Next, we have cuboidal cells. Cuboidal cells have a more of an ice cube appearance, okay, more of an ice cube, a perfectly square cuboidal appearance to them. Okay. I'll make this my last one. Columnar here. Columnar cells, well, they have a rectangular, sometimes cylindrical, long appearance to them. All right. Okay, folks, I'm going to let it go right now, okay? Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? Okay, folks, don't worry about what we talked about today. In 15 minutes, I want you to log into classmarker.com, take your lab exam, focus intensely for about 39-40 minutes, and do a really good job, okay? When you're done, take a nice break for yourself because you've earned it, okay? Any questions? If you have any technical problem during the exam, such as the website or your computer crashes, shoot me an email and I'll get it fixed for you. Carissa, there's no, once we log off with our class here, there's no need to stay on Zoom, okay? You just go on to Class Marker. Was there another question? Amanda, if you don't know your registration code, you're going to have to stay on with me, okay? Other questions? Okay, so if you have any individual issues, Amanda, please stay on with me. Please stay on. Otherwise, folks, you can log off and take your exam at 9:30. Good luck, okay? See you on Thursday.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Danielle, do you need any help? If not, you may log off. Josie, if you don't need help, please log off. Phaedra, do you need any help? Okay, so let's see here. Hold on just a second, Amanda. Okay.